Thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Tonight, I'm very fortunate to have as my guest author Daniel Smith, who has become a pretty good friend of mine over Facebook and in the interwebs, and we are co-conspirators in this grand project called Apocalypse Weird. But Daniel has a fascinating story that goes well beyond Apocalypse Weird, and I brought him on the show tonight to talk about this crazy story that he has and some of the new work that he has coming out. And I'm going to introduce you now. Welcome to the show, Daniel Smith.
Hey, thanks, Hank. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Daniel, I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask all of my guests when we start. Tell us a little bit about how you became a writer.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the northernest part of Michigan, Lower Peninsula, on the 45th parallel. They call us the parallel walkers up there. And I grew up in the middle of a cornfield, and our closest neighbor was about a mile away. And we did all those things you can imagine rural people do, canning, our preserves, gardening. I was a member of the 4-H club, and all my friends loved that because my mom taught sewing, and so awesome. Everybody came over to my house to learn sewing, and I think that was my first sweepstakes ribbon at the county fair, was actually for sewing, not for anything else. But when you live out in the middle of a rural area with just the farm and no television per se, and your wood burning, very, very off the grid before that was a term, and then that was just a way that people lived.
Yeah.
You read books. You read a lot of books. And I was one of the kids, like a lot of the people that have been on your program, that was under the blanket with a flashlight late at night, and it just couldn't put these books down. And one of the first memorable gifts I received from my mother was a typewriter, and that kind of launched the path. And I think it was somewhere early in grade school, like second or third grade, when the passion really kicked in. And my first book was written, I think I had sixth grade. And it was cover to cover, and oddly enough, it was reminiscent of some of the projects we're working on. There was a fog, there was a heavy mist, there was a creature that came out of the fog. I need to dig that book out. That could be my Apocalypse Weird story right there.
You just saved yourself a lot of work.
So that's yeah. So that's kind of what got me going. Initially I had started out reading a lot of sci-fi and horror and the little big books that we all had when we were kids. I don't know if they still give them the kids the same way today with Harry Potter out now, but we had Treasure Island and we had Sherlock Holmes and the classics.
Yeah.
The classics. And by the time I got around to 11, 12 years old, I started reading Nietzsche.
Like every 11-year-old does.
Well, it was obviously it was something that was there, Well, first, I have to say, first I went through the encyclopedias. There's the thing about the kid that lives in the middle of nowhere reading the encyclopedias.
Right.
And so the one new book that we got each week is my grandmother. We'd drive into the city, or the local town city there, to the A&P grocery store, and they had the Funkin' Wagnalls encyclopedia. And it wasn't we're not talking Britannica here. It's not that thing.
Right.
But every week or two you get a new edition.
Right.
And that was my reading material at 8, 9, 10 years old. And then from there it went into Nietzsche. And that had a lot to do with Jim Morrison and the Doors. And that's
I was going to say
that's good.
What does that do to an 11-year-old who gets into nihilism,
Well, that's the thing. Is I think a lot of people remember Nietzsche for nihilism, and they think of passive nihilism, which which is pretty depressing and down. But there's also an active nihilism, which is embracing, and I think that's been kind of a key to my success in life. Because from there, around 12 years old is around the time that I left my parents' house, and I was essentially the equivalent of an emancipated minor, I think is what they call it today.
Yeah.
Where you're allowed to move out, and and so having that idea that the straight nihilism, and I guess to a teenager would be that, well, nothing matters. But if nothing matters, you could be depressed and hurt yourself.
Right.
You could say, well, if nothing matters, then why not? Why not do this? Why not do that? Why not go? Why not me? And I just kind of kept going forward with that idea. And
that is a fascinating way to look at that. I do think that that's another discussion for another day. But that is.
We can do a whole interview just on
I
that.
almost went down a rabbit trail, but I decided to dial back. But that's a fascinating way to look at it. That why not me? What is holding me back from doing great things or whatever? That's a great way to look at it.
Well, I think you summed it up. You're right. We could have a long discussion just on that topic, but that is the summary. And so just kind of actually what started me in writing is I had that love and I had that bug and I had these interesting things from what I reading material at a young age, pulling around these philosophical thoughts, and then essentially I was out of my parents' house and hitchhiking around the United States. First it was around the local area of Michigan, and then it was out towards L.A. and I was bouncing back and forth between Michigan and L.A. And then I hitchhiked across the country fully when I was 18. And it was a bit of a Kerouac kind of thing. And, that was at a time when you could hitchhike across the country.
Right.
And, or maybe it was, and I just didn't know any better. That's probably a closer interpretation of that. But you start meeting people in different places, and my biggest takeaway from that, and since then I've lived in Europe, I've lived in Crete, I've lived in Prague, I've traveled to 22 countries, over 300 cities, and I found that out kind of by accident, just tallying it up on one of those Facebook apps. I shocked myself. But with all that nomadic type of existence, the thing that you do pick up is, people love their kids, and people believe they're doing the right thing, even if they have a totally different path that they're on to get to that place. And I have good friends that are police officers that I've known for 20 some years that are like brothers to me, and they're good guys. But I also know some guys that they are not police officers. In fact, they're probably wanted by the law. But if you talk to them, they believe that they're doing the right thing too. And if you sit down and you have a beer with either of these guys, so that's one of the things I learned with that. And that so to bring it back around, that's what got me into writing and in pursuit of the human condition. And so I ended up eventually going to college and studying philosophy and cognitive science to learn about the mind and the human condition and take all the traveling in. And with my books, I try to execute some insight into that human condition.
Excellent. So you're traveling around the country. You're hitchhiking. You're and obviously between hitchhiking and there, you found a career path and became a responsible adult. And then after that, you became a full-time writer. What possessed you to write your first novel to completion and decide that you wanted to publish it?
Oh, having children, essentially. That was so. Yeah,
it does it to a lot of us.
Well, a tag word you said there is like becoming responsible.
I said that with a wink because
because I tell you, if you look at my nieces and nephews and children that are 12 years old, I think of the fact that I was living on my own as a teenager, and I've never missed a rent payment, and there's some responsibility to that. And I think one of the things with that, and this ties right to the novel thing. I'm not taking it down in a rabbit hole.
Sure.
But there were a lot of things that I was saying out loud to people, to authority figures, I guess you'd say. Not really so much they were being authoritarian over me, but teachers or adults, if you will. And I kind of had my plan, man. I knew what I wanted to be able to do. And they're like, "Well, you're just a kid. You're a silly kid." Da da da. And it is odd that once you start getting a little bit of gray hair on the side panels, or losing it off the top, right. Some of us, a lot of what I said, it hasn't really changed. But then people start listening because they're like, "Oh, well, now Now it must mean something. So, the responsibility was certainly always there. And one of the things that, I did get success with that why not me thing. And, I did college, and then after college, I went to work for a software company that we were doing AI work. It's artificial intelligence, but it was just called forecasting.
Yeah. For
long-term care homes to make sure that people could eat something more than oatmeal. People have all these different kinds of diets. Diabetes, no salt. And so by forecasting what their dietary needs were over long term, we could actually give the kitchen recipes automatically out of the software using artificial intelligence. This is in the 90s, before .coms came out.
Awesome.
And so then what ended up happening with that is I had some great success right out of school. And, I should mention that, because I traveled around, some listeners or someone might say, well, how did I get to college traveling around? Well, the truth is I don't have a high school diploma. I tested into college. And that's something it's awesome. I'm not going to advise my children to do it.
No, absolutely not. But yeah, that's,
So I had kind of a lot of idealism, though. And so I had this position that where, we're doing great things for long-term care. And it was before the .coms was the same kind of idea that we're probably going to make a great deal of return on this. And I didn't see what was coming is that the competition that was still in DOS and, the black and white screens, essentially, they just made us disappear by buying us out, which is now it's a common thing now. But at the time I was a bit shocked. And that's what sent me to Europe. And then when I came back, I had actually a further lucrative career in technology. But I always put the writing on the side. I was continuing writing, but I didn't pursue publishing. But then, when my kids were born, I just didn't want to say. It's like, hey, when you look at my tombstone, it's like, yeah, Dad wrote a lot of software that went away. and it was, I grew up without any financial resource, and it really doesn't have the much merit with me. But what does have merit to me is having a bunch of books on a shelf.
Yeah.
Because the kids can look at that, and the kids, they're driven by that. And my son, who's in second grade, they publish in their school. That's part of their writing program.
Awesome.
And he's proud to come home and tell his dad, hey, I wrote my book today, and I'm publishing today, and I'm putting these thoughts together. And it's I think for my son, you definitely have to take care of food and shelter. There's no doubt about that. But there's also a higher thing that we give our children, and my humble way of doing it. I'm not a great musician. I'm not a theater guy. The way that I'm able to kind of translate my thoughts and what I want to teach them is through words, and by trying to find a medium. So after dilly-dallying around with tons of manuscripts and stacking them, stacking them into boxes in the storage. It was when my first son was born that I said, okay, this is what's going to be. We're going to stay at home. We're going
to
write.
And what was where did the idea for this first book when your son was born and you said, okay, this is going to be the beginning of me building my legacy. Then how did the idea for that first story form?
Well, I was always excited about science fiction, and I had started writing a science fiction story back in let's say 1999, and it was called Big Brother 2.0, and it's yet to be published. But I got the first draft done, and I was very excited about it. And a friend of mine that managed a movie theater said, Daniel, come check out this new movie. You're gonna love this. This is great. And so it was awesome. We got a 6-pack. There's nobody. This is like the preview before the show opens for the public, right?
Yeah. And
we go upstairs, and the movie was The Matrix.
Ah.
And as I mentioned, the sci-fi I had was Big Brother 2.0, so you can imagine the commonality of themes there.
Right.
So at that time, I kind of got a little bit depressed. I'm like, man, well, there's no way I can write and compete. If I knew today, I would go ahead and put that out.
Right. They stole my story.
Yeah, well, or it's just like, there's no way I can write something that's already been out there. But today,
right.
So I put the writing on the back burner and started working full on other business. But then what happened is I met this girl. She was a friend of mine, and we met on the Upper West Side. We used to go to this Italian restaurant in the neighborhood, and the chef there was really cool. And all the single people would go in and put them at one big table. And she became a really good friend, and she was going through this situation in her life. And I said, well, a good therapy is writing. So together we developed this story about a girl that her father's suffering illness, and he's an artist, and he creates pots, and an artist, like a working artisan, like he sells these to hotels, and he sells them to around the world. So these are actually things that he actually has a pretty good artisan business, but he's older, he's in his 70s, and his hands are fatiguing. And so working with her, we developed the story. And she wrote some of it, and it just kind of made her feel better. So, long story short, that woman ended up becoming my wife. and so, 10 years later, no, maybe not 10 years, maybe 7 years later, I guess, when I decided to write full time, I wanted to go back and do the science fiction. But everyone was telling me, when I say everyone, I live here in Manhattan, right near the Flatiron Building, and then that's, where St. Martin's Press is, and there's all the agents, like just about every agent you could think of in Manhattan is within 2 blocks of my house. And I know some of these people, and a lot of people in publishing, they're all like, don't do science fiction, whatever you do. You have to do literary fiction, you have to do this. I'm like, well, I have
real books.
Yeah, I have to do a real
serious
book.
books.
I have to do a serious book.
Right.
So okay, well, I had this idea, and I worked on it with my wife, and so I rewrote it, and that's The Potter's Daughter, and that was the first novel. And I did actually have some fortune. It made it to a couple agents, and then made it up to a publishing house, and they told me there wasn't enough sex in it. So basically, yeah, right. Well, whatever. But that's how I came up with the first novel.
Awesome. So you got bitten by the bug. I don't know about you, but for me, I had been, I considered myself a writer for years, and had not ever actually finished a whole novel. But when you finish that first work, and I don't know what it is, but there's something about waiting until the time in life where it clicks, and maybe it has to do with getting a little gray on the side walls, or I don't know what it is, but and every writer I talk to, it's a little bit different, but there's something about when you come to a place in life where you're able to tell that story for the first time, and when you get to the end of it, something inside you changes, and I know it did for me, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a real writer now, and what drove you to keep going after writing The Potter's Daughter?
Well, I should say that wasn't a one-off. I actually, when I decided I was going to write it, I retired from the corporate world. And so I had a 40th birthday party. My wife had a party for me up at Restaurant 81. It's up by the Natural History Museum, and I had all my friends there. And I said, this is it. I've been writing for a long time, and I keep saying I want to take it serious, and so I'm going to take it serious. I have a child now, and at the time I was flying around the country like 2 or 3 days out of the week, or I was gone most of the week, so I want to be home. Right. So I jumped. I didn't just get by the bug. I kind of got swarmed. I mean, I jumped off a cliff, and I had the naivete to think that, like, well, I'm going to write this book, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. I mean, I'm just going to write it, and then that's going to be a vocation.
Right.
People are going to come running.
Right.
And you'd be surprised, Hank, that did not happen.
Well, yeah. I'm that does surprise me, actually.
So,
I think we all think that in the beginning. But,
well, it's good to have that inspiration. I think it's important to think that about every project, and you have to be inspired by it. But
I think so too. I think it's important to have the confidence to think that this might actually be it.
Yeah. So when I went into it, though, that even though I had waited until I was 40 to be, and I'm 47 now, so this was a few years ago already, right?
Yeah.
So there's two little kind of neat notes about that. Is I actually saved up for a while so I'd be able to step away and write on it. Say I'll give this a couple years, see what happens. So my birthday's on September 14th, and we had this party, and it was a weekend Sunday night, and I have all the stuff typed in stocks, and so that was 2008. On September 15th, Lehman Brothers fell the next day, and the market crashed.
Oh, man.
So so at the time I decided to step away, rely on my other resources, the world really took a, I don't know if the world was talking to me or who they were talking to. The world took a big turn. But at any rate, I mean, I dug in, and one of the things I had confidence about wasn't just in the ability to write a story, which, by the way, a lot of that was misplaced because, as a novelist, that you learn by writing books, and every book you look back, it's like, wow, there's some beautiful things in that last one, but Mulligan has. I've read both your books, and Mulligan has some depth of character that Bloom close to. I mean, I say that makes it sound like Bloom's great. Bloom's a great book, but I mean, you can just see that it's like it's a little bit better. And I expect the next one will be better.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And but I had the confidence to think that I was a better writer than I probably was at the time. But the other thing I had a confidence about that was true, and this is that gray hair thing, is I had a business acumen. And, essentially, since I was 12 years old, I said I've always paid the rent. That's because everything I've touched has kind of turned to gold, and I just, believe in the ethic. If you work hard, and, you may not have a natural talent, but if you work hard, you can play piano.
Right.
You're not going to be a concerto artist. You're not going to end up at Carnegie Hall necessarily, but you can, if that's what you want to do, you do it. Right. And it's about discipline. It's about doing it. And so.
And the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about that. And so I had the business acumen of a bunch of years. What I was surprised about is this was actually the first thing that I touched that didn't turn to gold overnight. I mean, I do have some great success. I mean, I've had Cathari Treasure has been a #1 bestseller in the UK back in 2013. It was #1 and #2 for most of the year in a main category. And then it finally, I'm very proud of this, is just recently it hit #1 here in the United States. And it took a little while, but that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. But, friends of mine, they're like, oh, that's great. You became a novelist. And look, it's like almost overnight. And it's like, yeah, but remember what I said before. It's like I started this, 7 years ago. And so it took 5 years for Cathari Treasure to take off, and then another 2 years for it to hit in the United States. So, yeah, these things kind of happen overnight after you work at them really hard.
An overnight success, 7 years in the making.
Yeah, that's kind of how that went, right.
Yeah. So tell me about Cathari Treasure. Now that you mention it, you published The Potter's Daughter. How do you transition then over to kind of techno thriller adventure type stories?
All right. So The Potter's Daughter is a story of a woman returning home, and her mother's been deceased, and the father was friendly with the brother who's also deceased. And it's a literary fiction kind of plot where things are twisted up, and it's kind of deep and heavy, and there's a lot of insight and reflection, and then there's redemption. Gotta have redemption.
Yeah.
And it's a great book. It's I one of these days I think I need to have it re-edited. I don't think I had the best editor at the time of what was available for us as indies at that time. But the story is great and tight. But as I mentioned, it made it all the way to the top desk as far as I was concerned. And they're like, enough sex. And in my mind, and this is probably where my business acumen does me wrong, is others would say, well, you just got to keep sending it to all the desks. But I'm like, there's only a few publishers here in Manhattan, really, for reals. And if one of them's saying this, I expect that the others are going to say it too. So we were, at that time, now this is actually kind of a neat story. So at that time, as I mentioned, I quit my other profession, but I'd taken an office across from the Chelsea Hotel here on 23rd Street. And that's very inspirational. A lot of great stuff was written in the Chelsea Hotel. The 2001 Space Odyssey was written there, and Leonard Cohen did a lot of writing there. And I mean, you go by that building, there's a bunch of, those history plaques, like this is a monument for this. They actually have like a half dozen of them out in front of the building.
Oh, that's cool.
Because all these cool things have happened there over the years. And Dylan Thomas was there before he died. All these great things. So right across the street, I had this little office above a Radio Shack. And I said, well, I'm going to write this other book. Now, the neat thing about that office was the floor that it was on. Next door was a travel writer, and he writes magazines, articles for like Americo, the international oil company.
Yeah.
And I mean, this guy's a historian, so he writes like history things, but he found a niche these well funded by a lot of these great magazines, and they sent them around the world to do all these cool things. So that inspired me. And then on the other end of the hall were a bunch of comedians, because a lot of Comedy Central comedians kind of were on the office space as well. When I say office space, this is really just the second floor of a building, and we all have like closets with doors on them. This is not like I'm not talking like a cubicle office space. This is and I was talking to this young comedian, and like, I don't know what I should write that out. And he was like, well, you know, these thrillers are popular. You should try doing this. And that guy's name was Pete Holmes.
Ah.
Yeah. So Pete Holmes, of course, he, at the same time I was writing that, he ended up heading out to L.A. and he wrote for a sitcom that didn't last long. But then he had his own nighttime show, and he has a podcast. It's incredible. It's you ever have a chance to check it out, called You Made It Weird. But at any rate, he kind of inspired me to put some of these things together, and then I was talking to the other fellow that writes these articles, and he told me, he said the guy that had my office before me was a writer, and he wrote this book about the Cathars. And I said, wow, light bulb, because many years before, I was studying under this professor who was one of the mentor people in your life, and he had talked about he'd always wanted to write a book on the Cathars. Of course, he meant a nonfiction book, and I thought, wow, well, this is the voice talking. These are things that are meant to be. So at that time, I had never really read a lot of thrillers, but I had read a lot of adventures. So I started sketching out an outline.
Back to those childhood classics.
Yeah, back to the childhood classics, right? And so I started sketching out an outline, and then right around that time, my second son was about to be born. He turns 5 here. In a week or so. So this is, so I guess it's 5 years ago. So my wife said, you need to come home from the office and help me with the baby. So, okay, I will. So I came home, so I had this sketched out, and the baby was born. And so I wrote this novel at night with one hand holding a bottle, feeding him, the other hand typing the story. And that's honestly, the truest way to tell it is I wrote the novel with one hand.
That's awesome.
And yeah, but it's a fun story, and I didn't take it that seriously. It was just fun. I mean, the facts are serious. I had readers, first readers, to kind of help me with the weaponry and that type of thing. But it's the Cathari Treasure is a story of gourmet chef here in New York, and keep in mind I live in Chelsea, so I know a lot of chefs and the food channels nearby, and I have friends that work at the food channel.
Nice.
And so I thought, oh yeah, well this is the gourmet chef, but his job before he became a chef was he was a French Foreign Legion legionnaire, like elite force. And but so it has well, it's cheesy, but I kind of wrote it with the element of cheesy. I mean, this has got to be fun. And then what I did is, with all the traveling that I've done, I just threw in some cities. I said, okay, well, it starts in New York because something happens, then it heads up to Boston, and then it heads to Montreal and Toronto, and and then it goes on until the climax of the book. And I wrote it, and it was fun, and I sent it around, and once again I had some success, and it made it. That book actually went to St. Martin's, and cool. The gentleman at St. Martin's said, "There's no way that the public is going to buy a book that has both military and a chef in it. It's just too. It's not gonna work because I think in this particular press, I mean, they're very categorized of what they should have and what they shouldn't have. So I was like, that's fine. But real nice guy. So I went ahead, and this is when I decided that I was going to self-publish for the first time. Because I should mention at this time, Potter's Daughter actually hadn't been published yet. It was still going around to agents. Okay. And it had been, I guess by this point it's almost 3 years. 3 years. We're at the end of 2012 now. So for 3 years, I've been sending books around, 3 or 4 years, and agents, and talking to people and houses, and things just keep getting passed on. And this is also right at the time where initially self-publishing was just that. It was a stigma. It was a vanity press, and you still had to go through the tastemakers. But then by 2012, the world turned turned in a whole different way, you know. So I put up the Cathari Treasure on Amazon, and the first few months, not a whole lot happened. And I didn't market it at all, I should mention, because I had 2 small children. So it was really, I just kind of put it there and set up a Twitter account and tweeted about it, and that was it. And then about 6 months in, my wife said, how come your cover doesn't look like the cover of these other thrillers? So I said, well, I don't know. I guess I should change it. And it wasn't that it was a bad cover. It just wasn't the same. It didn't have the same look as those in the genre. And this is part of the business, right?
Right.
And so I looked at a bunch of other books that were in my category that people were buying, and I saw they all had the name very large. And I really didn't want to have my name very large because there's so many letters in it, Daniel Arthur Smith. And the reason why I use my middle name, I'm sure a lot of people have figured it out, it's because there's a lot of Daniel Smiths.
Right. Smith's has kind of been around a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good name. But sure enough, I went ahead and it was the same cover art. I just switched it around so that the words were bigger on the top. You know, the title.
Right.
And overnight took off.
Isn't that incredible?
And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's, you know, my wife will tell you that's why. I'd like to think that maybe somebody read it and said, "Hey, everybody should read this." You know,
right.
I would.
It fascinates me the things you learn in self-publishing, and it really is a great study in the human condition to see what turns people on and what excites people. It's really crazy when you think about it.
Well, it is, and that's, you know, so that book sold really well. So my wife said, "Write another one. Write another Cameron Concade." That was supposed to be a one-off. This Cameron Concade series.
Yeah.
And so, but I got number 1 out of it in the UK. So I wrote The Somali Deception, and I went back to the guy at St. Martin's Press and said, well, you know, how about I do a series? Because he was doing a call for a series, and I split it all off, and it was still like, oh, this is really good, but you might as well go ahead and self-publish it. And so that went to the top spot in the UK as well, although that's yet to take off here in the US. But one thing I learned about that human condition thing is I think another reason why it launched so well early there is, you know, when you're an indie author, you don't have a whole marketing department behind you when you're choosing titles.
Right.
And you're caught in your bubble. And so at the same way that having traveled to so many places benefits me as a writer, it also hinders me in marketing. It really does. Because sometimes I'll use words or I'll use phrases, and I'll talk to other authors. Susan K. Quinn, who's a friend of yours as well.
Sure.
She's been a great insight to me a few times to just kind of say, reel it in. Reel that in. You're going in a direction that, you know, unless you're selling to the other 3 47-year-olds that have done what you've done, you know, that's your reader base.
Right.
And that's true. I have to think about, well, what if somebody, and so that goes back to Cathari Treasure is a word that, Cathari, I mean, it's something that people in the UK can see and they recognize it because it's European and it's English. But people in the United States, that's not a word that you would recognize or look for.
Right.
And I think that the title is something, and I've thought about rebranding it, but then again, it went to number 1, so maybe I don't have to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wow. Yeah. I get it. So, do you have other books for Cameron Concade?
Yeah, so there's a Cathari Treasure and there's the Somali Deception. The Somali Deception is a fabulous book. That actually was a series of like 4 episodes. So each has an arc of its own, and then there's an overall arc. And like a lot of what we write, it is put together with our experience. So I've traveled, as I mentioned. So it's the same format as Cathari Treasure. That something happens and Cameron Concade's drawn in, but this time instead of going to different cities within a few day period in North America, he goes to different cities in Africa and Northern Europe. And in this book, his friend, a good friend that was on the Special Forces team, and his old buddy from the first book that we meet, meets him in his bar on the Upper West Side, and he tells him that, you know, his sister's been hijacked in a boat that's been hijacked outside of the Seychelles. And of course, as it just so happens that this same sister, who's a model, right? It has to be a model, Hank.
Right.
And so the sister also used to be the girlfriend of Cameron Concade. So Cameron, of course, he'd help his buddy anyways, no questions asked. But but the girl, there's the added tension,
sure,
and conflict, which is, I talked before about when your books progress. So in my first book, I didn't, it's all action, and there wasn't a whole lot to Cameron, other than just he moved a lot.
Right.
But in the second book, another one, I want to add a little bit of dimension, and so that's why, so then he had, there's thoughts, there's flashbacks, but it's great because he heads to Kenya, and I have one of my best friends in the world, Alistair Boyd, is the director of an eco lodge there, and so I actually have Alistair in the book, and I was going to use a different name. I said, what do you think of this name, that name, and the other? And Alistair, with his ego, said, no, Alistair Boyd, that's the name of that character.
I love it.
So if you get a chance to read The Small Deception, there really is an Alistair Boyd, and he really does run an eco lodge, and he really does have leopards on his desk and these types of things. And so it's because I launched from there. And then another good friend of mine, she's a reporter in Kenya, and she gave me a lot of insights on to what's happening with Somalia and with their terrorists. And in fact, just today, this kind of dates this interview, but just today there was an attack in Kenya at a university. So these are things, because I have a lot of friends over there, I have a lot of insight on this, and that's what built the Somali Deception. The pitch for the Somali Deception is a lot of these groups are funded by white collar, wealthier people holding the puppet strings. And
right.
That's something I learned from, so that's where, if you were to go through Somali Deception and look at the characters in this, and one of the guys I have happens to be a warlord who's in the Mayfair Hotel, wearing Savile Row suits, and he's actually based on a real warlord from Somalia, because since they have a great lean on the government, they have diplomatic passage, and yeah, I digress. So anyways, there's a lot of fiction in there that really isn't so much fiction. But
yeah, and that also could be a whole other conversation for another podcast. So many books paint a lot of the geopolitical situations with very broad strokes, when there's many layers to the problems, and good fiction that can peel back those layers is good. That's great. You also wrote a book called Agroland. What's that about?
All right, so Agroland. So you had mentioned about going back to getting by the bug or finding the passion or writing what you want to write. So that was the other thing. What indie authors learn is that if you're not working with a big house publisher, you aren't constrained by the big house publisher. Mm-hmm. You aren't, if your brand is just this, you don't have to do this. Now, don't get me wrong. There's going to be more Cameron Concade, and I promise readers that enjoy Cameron Concade that Templar Force is coming out. It was supposed to be out a while ago, but what I decided to do after Small Deception is experiment with some other genre, and Agroland was the first experimentation, and it's a horror. It's a dark horror. It was also the first novella that I wrote in first person, and so it was experiment first person and experiment in horror. I think what ended up happening with that book, and this is coming in the story, is I think I did really well. I think it's a great book, but I think it's really weird, and I think it's really dark.
Well, I've read about half of it so far, and it's and I've read Cathari Treasure, and I read Cathari first, and the contrast is amazing. I can tell it's you, but I can tell that you definitely stepped into other shoes, and with Agroland, you can really tell that you had fun with it. That it's that my impression was, okay, Daniel's getting to what he really wanted to get to in this book.
And it is, and that's you nailed it. I mean, Cathari Treasure was fun. Don't get me wrong, but I like the Cameron Concade books, and I'm going to continue writing Cameron Concade books, but they are a formula that I've contrived to where, you know, there needs to be a bunch of travel in a few cities and in a few, you know, within just a few days. There's a lot of gunfire. There's a lot of violence,
Right.
and that's good. One of my readers up in northern England, he's a great guy, and he's a first reader. He helps kind of make sure I get my facts right. But he calls them the crash and bash 'em books, and they are. You can read Cathari Treasure, you know, in an afternoon if it's a rainy day. I mean, it's not a complex read. The chapters are short. It's meant to be. There's a lot of action. But I wanted to have some different reflections, some different approaches, and I also like you. I like to experiment with the craft.
Yeah.
I mean, I think right now, if you were to take my names off of Agraland and Cathari Treasure and Potter's Daughter and put the three books side by side, people would think that there are three different authors writing those books.
Right.
And people have told me that, and that's a huge compliment.
Sure.
So that's what happened with that. But the thing about Agraland, I wrote that initially as kind of a Halloween thing, too, because it's a horror. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do one each year. I don't know. I mean, it was after I wrote it, it's just like, I think it was so. I guess it just ended up being so dark. Like, I didn't mean it to be. It's like so. I didn't mean to freak anybody out. I mean, I was reading some Ligotti, and I don't know if you're familiar. He's a Lovecraftian, and True Detectives have been out, and I was just like, yeah, man, I can do that. I can do dark without just being, gory or whatever. I don't know, but yeah. So,
to me, dark without gore is so much scarier. The in-your-face gore, it's the psychological dark is way scarier to me.
Well, and there's gore in there too.
Yeah.
I don't know how many more of those I'll write, but I think it's a nice little thing to have on the side, and it's fun. Sure. That's what Agraland was, and once again, I really like that book because it ties together some ideas that, and I'm not just talking about the horror aspect of it. I mean, it's kind of an easier one. We could get into what does horror mean to the mind, but the book itself takes place in the Jordanian desert, where a team is working to basically grow crops in the desert and try to make use of water and drilling water out. And this is something that, readers have asked me, like, do people really do that? My editor's like, does that really happen? My editor, Crystal Watanabe, she lives in Hawaii, and she's like, what is a crop disc? And I had to send her some links because this is something that goes on in Saudi Arabia, where they found water far below the desert, and they basically bring that water up. And if you're flying over in a plane, you see all these little disc circles. And we have that actually a lot in the western part of our country, and especially with this drought, that's about all you see crops growing is where they drilled down way far. So I thought it was interesting to have that aspect of it. But the story really could have been on a moon base or an island or another planet. It's the idea of remoteness and facing an evil, and where do you go and how do you deal with it?
Right. Very Lovecraftian in theme.
That was the goal, but
yeah.
I think the idea with the human conditions, I try to have something in each of the books, and it's easier to do with horror and with science fiction, where you can read something and then ask questions of yourself or ask questions about it.
Right. So you have a book launch coming up very soon for a book that you started teasing out, I guess, about a week ago or so.
Yeah.
Maybe a week or 2 weeks. That is absolutely nuts from what I've seen about it. Hugh Howey Lives. What in the world is that about?
Oh, Hugh Howey Lives. So that was going to be a short story, and it turned into a novella because it's such a robust concept. And I actually cannot give myself credit for the concept. The concept was Hugh's, and that's how he ended up being in the story. In early November, Hugh wrote an article titled "Humans Need Not Apply," and I
remember that.
Right, and I believe he lifted that title from a video that's circulated the interwebs and Facebook of all the things that computers do that we may not realize they do. And the main theme he was pulling from that is how it affects authors. And he projected, however you want to look at it, that in 50 to 100 years, the authors will pretty much be obsolete because computers will be able to do everything an author does, and no one will be able to tell the difference. And I touched on, I said I worked in corporate, and I mentioned AI, but I worked with computers for a good part of my professional life. Well, that was before the writer career, and a lot of that stuff is there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. So I sent Hugh an email, and I said, yeah, I think you have something there, and I would like to write a story on it, and just kind of for fun, we'll have one author that we think is still out there, Hugh Howey, and we'll have a couple girls heading out in a sailboat towards an island because that's they believe Hugh Howey lives, and so that's kind of the meat of it. And Hugh, I'm not sure if you have corresponded with him or if you know him, but I know that you know of him, of course. Sure. And Hugh is very friendly and outgoing and supportive of indie authors across the board.
Right.
And Hugh's. I don't know Hugh. Apart from this correspondence, I'd never talked to Hugh. I mean, I commented on his board, some things back and forth like that. But Hugh was very supportive. He's like, absolutely, go for it. And so I did. So, it's I don't want to give away any spoilers per se, but the main idea of it is that in the future, the archive, which is kind of a computer of the future, writes all the books, and everybody just streams their books, and it, at this point, books can they look at what you like. They look at, there's Hank Garner, and he's living in the South, and he, it's the same way that the Amazon algorithm works today. He keeps buying these types of books, so he must like that. So the more fine-tuned they get with your tastes, it's like, oh, he really likes the bar scenes. We know in the books, because it counts that he goes back and keeps reading the bar scenes, and he really likes a good bar fight. And so they're going to make sure that every book that they give to Hank has a good bar scene and a good bar fight. They're gonna, and by pooling all of the data and all the page reads that you've done, and they're going to be able to put that together into a book. And if you think about, well, how would that work? It's on a real high level. It's just a matter of like having a cookbook that says I have X number of characters, and I'm just going to mix them up this way to do this, like a theater company, if you will.
Right.
We have the X number of actors, and we know that with them we can do X number of shows, or we just come up with something each week, with returning characters.
Right. Who did this fantastic artwork for Hugh
Howey
Lives?
The artwork. So you had mentioned that I started poking about that the book was coming out a week or two ago, but I was able to do that in a way not able to do with the other books. I've never done any other marketing. I want to make sure that if I market it, and this is the first book I'm actually really marketing, I want to make sure that I came out of the gate with a big loud roar. So I contacted artist Ben Adams, and Ben Adams is an amazing artist. He has an incredible range, incredible breadth. He works out of Knoxville. I'm not sure he's American, actually. He might actually be from, I don't know a whole lot about Ben. Is kind of mysterious in that way. But he works out of Knoxville, and he comes up with such a wide variety of art. You just can't pin it on him. He can do paint, watercolors, painting. He can do digital art, and I've been.
He kind of has this signature watercolor thing that is amazing, and you can see it a little bit in your Hugh Howey artwork. But man, it's just phenomenal.
Initially I was going for the watercolor kind of aspect, but because I'm so impressed with Ben as an artist, I didn't want to hinder him with my commission. I didn't want to say so I sent him a picture of Hugh profile, and I kind of pasted over the picture a gold bowl with a bunch of cords. You know, so basically I took and merged a picture of somebody with a whole bunch of cords in their head as a robot would be,
right,
and a picture of Hugh. And if you look closely at the cover of this new book, and our pal Hugh Howey, it is Hugh. It's not just a picture of a guy on the cover. It is actually Hugh, aged 200 years, with an incredible woolly beard.
Amazing.
Which I have to say, Susan Quinn, on reading a copy, I didn't realize that I had added that in there. So I didn't have a beard in the story, but when Ben Adams created this artwork, he thought it'd be great because there was a hint towards Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man is the way that Hugh found, and so he said, I want to go full Da Vinci. So you really see that Da Vinci aspect in there. Yeah. But then he also, to keep it authentically Da Vinci, he added that big woolly beard. So I wrote into the story, I had to add that into the story after I got the pictures. I had to say, and he had a woolly beard. And then, so Susan Quinn sees that, and she's like, Hugh's going to love it. Because it didn't occur to me at the moment that I did it, that Hugh wrote a book that has that word in it. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, the art of subtlety. I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Like, oh, she's like, oh, I can't believe you did that. And it's like, yeah, neither can I.
Like, I'm glad I did that by accident. Yeah.
Well, I almost took it out, but I'm like, no, it's fine.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love it. So when does that actually come out for sale? It's up for pre-order now, isn't it?
It's up for pre-order. The ARCs are going to be coming out this weekend, and so it's less than 2 weeks. I think it's like April 14th is when it's being released. But prior to April 14th, I'm not sure when the sales going to go up. Any fan of Hugh, if they contact me through my newsletter or through Facebook or whichever way that they can reach me with the many ways, I'm giving out ARCs because Hugh was kind enough to let me use his name. I don't own Hugh. I certainly don't. And I think he had this great story, and he's allowing me to kind of, he's allowing me to use his name on the book. And so with that, I definitely feel to give back to the community, to say, well, this is something Hugh did and something I did. And if you want a copy, let me know before it goes out, and I'll give you a copy. No problem.
And this episode will go live on the 7th, so a week before official launch. And everyone go and pre-order your copy now. You've got a week. As we're sitting here, I am clicking over and pre-ordering my copy right now. I encourage you to do the same. So Hugh Howey Lives is coming out, and then in a couple of months, you've got another big launch with your Apocalypse Weird entry.
All right, so let me tell you how the spring is going to go. Hugh Howey Lives is coming out. Also in April, we have Sarfer, which is going to be an entry in the Hugh Howey's fan fiction of Sand in the Kindle world.
Cool.
That's going to be coming out. It's a story of the son of a sailmaker who, have you read Sand?
I have.
Yeah, okay. Who hasn't, right?
Right.
It's the son of a sailmaker. His father made sails in the walls of Springston, because he had the big space. And so after the walls fell, this kid's out on his own, but he has a modified Sarfer, and he's a courier for whoever wants to pay. And so there's some interesting things about this character. It's a short story, but that's coming out. Another thing that I'm working on is that I put on ice is I wrote a novel the titled Plane Drifters that's going to be coming out soon. We can talk more about that in a little bit. But before, I'll be working on that to tighten that up and get that to the editor. But then I'm turning in a story to the Future Chronicles for the Time Travel Chronicles that are going to be coming out at the same time as Apocalypse Weird. So that's going to be really great across the board. So I'll have a time travel sort story there. And then July 21st is when that's set to release. And also on July 21st is Apocalypse Weird, The Blueprints. And The Blueprints is going to be incredible. Now, something I didn't want to do with my Manhattan Apocalypse is I live in Manhattan. And, I was here 15 years ago. I work downtown. I'm really not into buildings being destroyed a whole lot and falling. I didn't see a need for that.
Yeah.
I was here with Sandy and had the power out. I had something to work with. Flooding is a thing, but that's almost an easy gimme.
Right.
So, in looking at the different ways I could have an apocalypse, I thought, well, a real neat thing to do, due to the fragility of Manhattan, was to create a siege story. And so that's what this apocalypse weird is. So when the apocalypse comes, it's essentially an EMP type of apocalypse, but it's not. It's weirder than that. But that's kind of the nutshell. It's an EMP. And it's something that's been brought on by the Blue Prince. And the Blue Prince has had an invitation to come to New York for several hundred years. And the last time that they tried to bring him here was Tesla, when he built that big Tesla tower out in Long Island. And he created this huge supercell. And, people gathered around. They saw this amazing supercell, and this was a huge machine, the Tesla tower, that was supposed to be able to transmit energy through the stratosphere. And then that blinked out. Well, nobody really knew where that went, but in Apocalypse Weird, we'll find out. We'll find out what happened to that energy, and what it's doing to the present day, and how the Blueprints used it to get here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's sweet.
You and I have talked a little bit about our stories, but I've been careful not to get into great detail with a lot of authors because sometimes that kind of clouds your own story, and you start inadvertently taking on characteristics of things that you're reading or hearing about. But that's so funny because I have an EMP that I set off last night in my writing. That's amazing, and we have not talked about that at all.
No, we have not. We have not.
That's great, and mine is more of a spiritual, in a very broad term, causation of mine. So that's crazy. That's so funny.
Well, I think the themes that we do share, or maybe not. I mean, neither of us have released our copy yet.
Right.
There's still. I'm getting ready to start rewrites. I started some yesterday, so I'm kind of in the process of just wrapping on that now.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying today might not be true in a month when I turn this manuscript in, because
right.
New inspiration could come, or maybe I could see something that's like, oh, I don't like that, and change it. Until it's in front of the reader, it's a work in progress.
That's right.
But there are a few themes that happen in the apocalypse, and some of them are zombies or beings driven for food or hunger. Hunger seems to be a huge theme across a lot of the books. But yeah. I noticed that one of the things that we have in common for the summer, since we're both releasing in this summer, Boys of Summer, as it's right. Out to be, is we both have a theme of bringing something up that you can't put down.
Yeah.
And what are the terms of that? And that's so as I said, the Blueprints makes its way to the city, but that's because of the invitation. And so essentially, again, based on a Lovecraftian being, he's summoned is kind of what that invitation is. And because we've only shared on the highest level, that's the neat thing, is because we have this theme, what you do with yours, what I do with mine. It's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun.
It's going to be really fun. People are like Stefan Boltz, our other friend, who was going to be a Boy of Summer, but got moved up a little bit. I've had the privilege of reading his book, and I think that we have this undercurrent of these dark forces that people are forced to wrestle with, and I would love for us to talk after we both release our books, and maybe get Stefan on, because it seems like the three of us we're writing for a similar release date, and inadvertently writing some very similar themes, and that would be a great topic to explore.
Well, I think that is a neat topic to explore.
Yeah.
What does that say about the world that we see?
Right.
So I mean, I hate to do it in this show, but for listeners, I live in the heart of Manhattan, And
Yeah.
Hank, you certainly don't.
I do not. I live in the deep South in a very, very rural part of the country.
So what is it that you see? And this is for later. This is you can think on this. So when we do the Boys of Summer program, right? I think we're going to have to do a podcast for the Boys.
I think we're going to have to.
But that'll be a great theme of like, how is it that in your little bubble of the world and my little bubble of the world we're seeing these same themes, and what does that mean? What does that mean? And maybe we can wax philosophical.
I think we need to.
You know.
I think we need to. I think we need to have beers, and I'm sure the deeper we wax, the deeper it'll get. But yes, we will do that. Daniel, this has been the fastest hour that I can recall in a while. We're already an hour and 10 minutes in. Tell people where they can find all of your work. It sounds like you're going to have a very busy spring and summer, and there's going to be a groundswell of Daniel Arthur Smith titles coming out. But where can people find you to keep up with your production schedule and to sign up for your newsletter so that they can make sure that they get on your ARC list and all of that good stuff? Where can people plug in to make sure they're with you?
Great, thanks, Hank. Well, certainly anybody can go to danielarthursmith.com, and there you can find the newsletter, you can find the statuses of where the books are, and find out what's going on with me. The newsletter is going to give anyone direct line access to free material, the books, posters. I just had Ben Adams creates that great artwork we mentioned before, so I put some posters together, and I've commissioned Ben to do other artwork for some of these upcoming titles. So there's going to be a lot of really great swag as well, just to kind of tune in and check out. And the ebooks right now are predominantly on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And the print books are available anywhere print books are sold, though you may have to ask your local bookstore to order them in, and you should.
Yes, you should. Absolutely. And just to touch on something real quick, you mentioned your website and your newsletter. A lot of people, I think, maybe don't understand some of the marketing tools that we as indie authors use. And you may say, well, I'm friends with you on Facebook, or I follow you on Facebook. That's all I really need to do. And Facebook has really changed, and Twitter's a little different. Each network has their own quirks and things, but Facebook especially has changed the way that they allow people to interact with each other, especially if you're a business or an author or an artist or whatever. And really the best way to connect with an author or an artist is to go to their website, so that you're making sure that you're getting all the information that's available and not just what social network X is allowing to be filtered in or out. So definitely go to danielarthursmith.com to make sure that you're staying up to date with everything that he's got going on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hank. You know, that it's surprising the direction that some of these companies are taking, and I'm crossing my fingers that they figure it out and get it right. But in the meantime, yeah, stop by the website. We have some fun stuff. You know, we just I mean the books are great, but I tell you, having access to some of this artwork is really cool. It's really cool. And one thing I love ebooks because of the portability. But I love books. And a lot of people tell me they love books. And I love book covers. And one of the things that I'm able to do, if you subscribe to that newsletter, is give some visuals, give those posters, because I think that's something that people like to put next to their bookcase. You know, you can think about your author or the material that you really enjoyed, and I have to give it to Ben Adams. That isn't bad artwork to have around, anyways.
Absolutely, that's right. And I'm exactly like you. I own 2 Kindles, and and I always have my phone with me, and I have ebook readers on my phone, and I always have a book at hand electronically. But then I love to get those paperbacks and put them on my shelf and just have have a tangible connection to the art, and it's I'm with you. Well, buddy, thank you for coming on the show. It's just been a phenomenal hour, and we will definitely touch base back for another podcast this summer. Everyone, go ahead and mark your calendars. Get ready for a Boys of Summer podcast, and we'll definitely revisit when these books come out. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot.